In this webinar, I want to talk about the birth chart as your life story and as your fate or life narrative, and how it describes those things in a broad, overarching context. So, ancient astrologers conceptualized astrology as the study of fate. And that's actually why the subtitle of my book is Hellenistic Astrology, the Study of Fate and Fortune. And fate itself was conceptualized as an ordered sequence of events that was arranged in accordance with a divine plan or purpose. So, the second century astrologer Vettius Valens used an analogy actually, where he said that each person is like an actor that's in a play. And in a Stoic context, he said that each of us must play our part the best we can, whatever our role is in life, because each of us has different roles in the overall grand scheme of things. So, in this context, the birth chart becomes sort of like a map or a guide to understanding what your life narrative is. And it asks or helps to answer, what am I doing here? Or what makes my life unique compared to other people? So while the chart itself, you can use a lot of highly technical like techniques to look into minute details in the chart through paying attention to like smaller measurements or different timing techniques. Sometimes I find it really useful to zoom out and to look at the life as a whole and look at the big picture of the birth chart and what it says about, what is the overall narrative arc of a person's life. What areas of the life are a major focus compared to other people? What are the areas in a person's chart or a person's life where they experience luck or good fortune versus what are the areas in a person's life where they experience challenges or even misfortunes or bad fortune? How do different timing techniques indicate when certain events in the person's life will unfold? These are the big picture questions that interest me the most in astrology when you pull up either a celebrity chart and you can kind of get a big picture overview of the overall narrative of the person's life and the things that are known about that person publicly, or even just looking at individual charts when you can talk with a client or talk with another person about their birth chart and truly start to hear the person's life narrative come alive in this really unique way through the lens of the birth chart. So every time I look at a chart, I love doing it because I love learning about the life story of an individual. And there's something about that, which is something we all get through, let's say, those of us who enjoy reading like a biography about like a person or even like a famous person, like a celebrity. There's something inherently interesting in learning about somebody's life that you're interested in. But doing that through the lens of astrology opens up this whole other context in helping to truly understand the person's life narrative and their fate. So, within this context, today I'm going to do a series of birth chart readings with patrons of the Astrology podcast who signed up through my page on Patreon. And I've asked them to write out 1 to 2 sentences as a synopsis about what makes their life story distinctive or unique in some way. And then I'm just going to go through and do some little mini consultations, talking to people about their chart and their life and asking them questions about their life story in order to understand how the birth chart itself matches up in different ways or describes their actual lived experience. And so I just want to do that today because I genuinely enjoy talking to people about their lives. And also because I learn a lot every time I read a new chart. You learn something in the process of doing that. And I've always told people, like when I teach astrology, that's one of the big secrets is like an astrologer learns something new every chart they look at, even if the chart has placements that they know how to interpret or placements that they've seen before in the past, there's always something unique about the specific manifestation of a person's life. And I find that really interesting each time to see and actually hear the unique manifestation of specific placements in the chart. So, these live webinars, if you're watching this later on YouTube, are one of the benefits of signing up through my page on Patreon. So, if you'd like to get access to attending one of these in the future and get your chart read, then you can sign up at patreon.com/slash the astrology podcast. It's actually patreon.com/slash astrology podcast. Yeah, so why don't we just jump into it then, and then I'll sort of expand on some of these themes and add some commentary later as we go. All right, so let's go ahead and talk to the first patron that I was going to talk to, whose name is Charlene. Hey, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being a guest. So you already gave me your birth data, and so I'll put up the chart. You were born September 6th, 1979, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me share the chart and then let me know if this looks correct. You have 3 degrees of Pisces rising.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And in your synopsis, you said that you were adopted by extended family as your birth parents were 14 and 13 years old at the time of birth, and you were gifted and attended college at 16. Your parents thought you'd be a lawyer, but you wanted to be a musician, and you ended up in admin ops. So, yeah, let's talk about it. I guess first let's set up things with the chart itself. So you have Pisces rising. The ruler of the ascendant is Mercury. It's in Virgo in the seventh whole sign house, in the place of relationships and partnership. You have a whole stellium of planets there, including the North Node, the Sun, and Saturn and Venus. So that's a lot of concentration in the seventh house of relationships. This is a day chart, so I would expect your most positive planet would be Jupiter, which is in the sixth house of work and health and also subordinates. And then the most challenging planet is Mars, which is in the fifth house, which is usually the place of children, creativity to some extent, leisure activities, and other things like that. So, oh yeah, the last thing is your moon is opposite your sun, and the sun is near the node. So you're actually born the day of a lunar eclipse in Pisces. So you are
I was.
a lunar eclipse birth, which is pretty cool.
I think so. My 13-year-old daughter says that I have lore in regards to just my life in general and all the things that I guess all the stories that I tell her are just about being me.
Yeah, so you got a lot of stories. I mean, having an eclipse birth means that eclipses would be particularly important for you, and probably some of the most important events in your life have happened within 7 days of an eclipse during an eclipse season. So that's something we can get into, but why don't we start at the beginning with, I guess your primary unique thing at the beginning was just that you were adopted by extended family at birth, right?
Yes, my great aunt and uncle. I'm sorry, my great grand aunt and uncle. So by blood, my dad and my great grandmother are brother and sister by blood.
Okay.
And they had
So
me since I was 4 days old. And they legally adopted me at 2 years old. And I remember like the entire thing.
you remember the process of them adopting you?
I remember adoption day. I was in a plaid skirt with a black vest and a little bow blouse. I remember riding the glass elevator up the stairs. I remember being in the courtroom. People's Court was really popular back then, and I was going "Take it to court," which was like the little slogan from People's Court from the commercials, and it was getting a chuckle out of like the courtroom. So I always like to get a chuckle from a crowd, and even at that age, I remember that feeling of everybody laughing with me going "Take it to court." But I have memories going back to whenever I was a baby. Before I could even speak, I remember feeling things that I could not describe. I graduated high school at 16. I went to college at 16. Um, I have been known for basically like my intellect. And my parents always viewed me as like this big gun that really didn't quite go off because they thought that I was going to be like a senator or an attorney, somebody that really liked to talk. If you can't tell, I'm still talking. But I got bit by the music bug at 12 and did a hard pivot into the arts and music and went to school as a trumpet major and then switched to being an opera major. So I have a degree in opera.
Okay, that's what you meant. Is that what you meant at the end by admin ops?
Admin ops is me not using my degree. I'm an administrative person, basically, an operational administrative person. So I've been managing in an administrative capacity, operational admin. So things behind a computer. I worked in finance for 22 years, and actually now I'm in manufacturing, but it still is a position that is behind a computer, administratively running the background of my plant.
Got it. Okay, so you're
Yeah,
definitely the Virgo stellium's definitely coming out with like Mercury ruling
absolutely.
Mercury in its own sign in Virgo, along with that whole stellium, and just Mercury being the strongest planet in that stellium, and therefore the sort of intellectual abilities as well as the detail-oriented abilities of Mercury and Virgo really excelling there.
Yes, it seems that way. That's how I get paid. That's my profession, but I still do music stuff. I'm in a band, I'm a vocalist, and I've continued to do music things, since I've left college and graduated college, but it never was a paid kind of gig. It was just a little bit of money, if any money at all. It's something that I do as a hobby more than my career. I'm an administrative person as in my career probably forever.
Got it. Okay. So rather than, so you work then for a company or for somebody else in most context or have most of your career?
Yes, I've never been anything entrepreneurial y or had any kind of like gig work. I've always worked for somebody else, and I prefer it that way.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I think I misspoke and I said the ruler of your ascendant was in the seventh at the beginning, but it's not. It's because your ascendant is Pisces, so the ruler is Jupiter, which is in Leo in the sixth house, which is usually, like I said, the place of work and service, and that's actually your most positive planet. So it's like the signature of almost like somebody that works in that capacity for somebody else, but in that area does well or excels or actually has enjoyment and like good fortune in doing that.
It seems like it. And all of my Jupiter returns, which will be happening again this summer when Jupiter goes back into Leo, have signified some sort of leveling up in my career or my job at the time. And currently, it looks like it's happening again.
Okay. Yeah, I liked at the very beginning you said that when you were 12, that was when you made the switch from
Yes.
the initial aspiration to doing music, and 12, of course, would have been a Jupiter return, which is relevant for you and your overall life direction since Jupiter is both the ruler of the 10th house of career and life direction as well as the ascendant in the first house.
Yes, and when I got to studying astrology, and one of the cycles that I, studied at first was the Jupiter cycle. It was very tied into my career, and I could take it back even all the way to the age of 12, where I made a hard pivot of wanting to be an attorney up until that point and to right into the arts, going into music that year. It was a very hard pivot, and it was shocking. It was shocking to me, honestly, and it was shocking to my parents as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how you have like Neptune as one of your more angular planets, like right on the midheaven. I mean, aside from Mercury in the seventh, like Neptune is your most angular planet with your midheaven at 15 Sag and your Neptune at 17. So it's interesting that when Jupiter, the ruler of that, got activated, that you had this impulse to go in more of an artistic direction as opposed to the more analytical, argumentative direction of like the Virgo placements.
Yeah, I still never lost that analytical, argumentative piece of me, but I just didn't want to make a career out of it.
Okay. So, in terms of like big picture stuff, though, why are so many planets in your seventh house, and like what is the role of relationships in your life, or partnership, or one-on-one interactions with other people that sort of accounts for having so many planets in the seventh house at this point?
So I this was one of the things that actually drew me to astrology because I feel like I am my ultimate role is as a connector to people that I need to make heavy, deep connections with almost everybody that I befriend. And then I continue to stay friends with these people for an extended period of time. I have a lot of friends still from grade school. My internal clique has been with me for like 35 years, and we just hold on to these relationships. And once I befriend you, then you're just a part of my community, and there is a connection that is established that almost cannot be broken. It's almost like whenever you become my friend, you're like my family. And then there is a support that comes from that I'm willing to provide you. And I like to kind of like collect people, like almost like Pokemon, like a different cast of characters and different kinds of people, eccentric personalities and things like that. Each person serves a different person purpose. For me, they're all very different, but they all serve a purpose, and I stick with those relationships for a long time. But like that connection that I have with people seems like it is a driving force just in my life in totality.
Yeah, of connecting with people individually and that being really crucial to you and also making them almost like family to you. I thought it was interesting how you described that just because you have the ruler of the fourth house of family and home and living situation placed there, that Mercury in the seventh house, creating a connection and that you would describe it like that is interesting.
Yeah, and I tend to make a lot of friends through work. And there's
Mm,
something about the 17 connection, how it staircases from, I have Venus at 17 and Pluto at 17 and Uranus and Neptune at 17, the way that it staircases up the wheel of the chart. My I befriend people at work and they become my family, and it intersects to the 10th house as well. And it's like all one big flow. How I
mm.
typically make friends at work and I keep them for a very long time. I have friends from my first job when I was 15 years old that I still keep in contact with today, and we're close contact. But I tend to make a lot of my friends at work, and I like to have a really good time at work. I'm a silly goose.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, that Jupiter placement in the sixth house in a day chart as your most positive planet is really shining through there as just an area that goes really well for you, as opposed to we could think about hypothetically a scenario where somebody has their most challenging planet in the sixth house and like work is not an area of enjoyment for them, or where maybe they don't get along with people at work or they feel isolated or what have you. You really have like the opposite end of the spectrum there.
Yeah, I have a good time at work. I don't necessarily think that my work is very meaningful, and I wish that it was. But what has a lot of meaning are the connections that I've made personally with the people that I work with. I feel like that I'm able to guide them not only like at their job and their function, but throughout their life. I'm guiding, giving them probably unsolicited advice and guidance as they just chit chat with me. But I have developed very close relationships with all of the people that I work at my current job, and I kind of mentor them throughout their life moments that they're dealing with.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So this is a thing I talk about with like the ruler of the ascendant, which is that whatever the planet is that's the ruler of the ascendant, the person will tend to become the avatar of that in their life. And if it's a challenging planet, sometimes they can bring about some of the difficulties in that area of the life on their own. Whereas in your case, since it's a positive planet, it's like part of your fate or your narrative or your life story is that you bring about positive experiences for other people in your workplace and you act as a positive influence basically for other people that are there because you're literally represented by Jupiter, the most positive planet in your chart, which is the ruler of your ascendant in the sixth house of work. And that's actually like a crucial important role that you're playing in the world in some way and like bringing about good things in the workplace.
That's a perfect kind of way to describe it.
Nice. Okay, I like that. What's the deal with the Mars in the fifth house as being a challenging area for you, or how has that arisen for you at this point, if at all?
I'm not really sure. I notice it more in transit more than I have in as a natal placement. I when Mars comes around every 2 years to kind of intercept my Virgo stellium, I always have some sort of calamity. I had my bestie from college pass from an overdose. I had my mom pass from ALS. I had my work dad pass of a heart attack. And this is all when Mars comes around and intercepts that Virgo stellium.
Hmm.
Like every 2 years or so, there's always a big like meltdown crisis of something whenever the transit happens. But natally, a little bit hard to kind of tell being like a relationship house. Well, I was single on purpose until I met my husband, um until I was about 27 years old. I had a boyfriend early on in high school, and again, I was kind of like a brainiac and excelled at music and turned down some big scholarships to go to the same college as my boyfriend at that time. And then we ended up breaking up before I attended college. Didn't have any other scholarship opportunities at that point. So had to go ahead and go to the school where he was. And from that moment on, I was 16 years old. I was single until I was 27, the way that I wanted it. So
You're
no
single
real
from the ages of what?
relationships from
From the age
from
of,
of 16 to 27.
okay, so that's a pretty big gap. So it's
Yes.
like it's this is Mars, so it's I would normally think of that with Mars, but I've seen other people like with Saturn in the fifth house or sometimes like voluntarily celibate for a period of time, for example. And I don't know, that's almost sort of
Well,
similar in some way because you're like not, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't, maybe that's not
totally going to declare it. I wasn't celibate. All right, I just was
okay.
single. Okay, I just was single, and I
Got
and I
it.
liked it that way. That was a
Hmm.
fun time. I had a stable of people that I could pick and choose who I wanted to actually hang around, and that was a fun way for a young person to live that had the vitality that I had back then. I'm 46 now, but back then that was a fun way and a choice to live like that. And maybe I could attribute that a little bit to Mars being in the first house, just kind of like cutting up little connections that I made, where I thought something would last, and then not it wasn't going to last. So I just went ahead and continued with the stable life.
So maybe there was, I mean, were there like other people during that time that maybe would have been in a relationship with you, but you chose to like cut and move
Yes,
on? Yeah,
yes, for
okay.
sure, for sure.
Got it. That makes sense. And then did you say it was 27 when you met your partner?
Yeah, I was 27 years old when we met,
Okay, so
and
that was the
then
start of your Saturn return in your seventh house.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And is that ongoing?
Yeah, we're still married. We've been married for 15 years, and we were actually married. You had asked for some degree examples in a previous webinar, and we were married on a my Venus sextiling my North Node exactly 8 degrees during a Venus retrograde in Las Vegas.
Venus sextiling your North Node exactly the day you were married?
Yes,
Nice. Okay. So that's pretty cool. So was Venus in Cancer or was it on the other side in Scorpio?
Scorpio.
Scorpio. Okay. Um, why don't we look at the date just out of curiosity? Dynamic. Let me animate a bi-wheel. Do you know the date offhand?
Yeah, it is October 23rd, 2010.
Okay. So this should be up. So October 23rd, 2010.
Yes. and it was in
Okay.
Las Vegas, Nevada at 1 p.m.
Okay, I'll just approximate it here. So yeah, we see Venus was retrograde at 8 degrees of Scorpio, and it was sextile your North Node in the seventh house at 8 Virgo, and also heading towards, it was also applying within a degree of sextile to the ruler of your seventh house, Mercury. It's at late 7 degrees of Virgo. So that's pretty cool. This is just post Saturn return. So it's like you met at the beginning of your Saturn return, went through the initial 2 to 3 years of the relationship, and then decided to make it official once Saturn had shifted into your eighth.
That's about right. And this is right at the end of my husband's Saturn return. He is 2 years younger than me, and he's also a Pisces rising and Virgo sun.
Wow, okay. Is he also
Right.
Saturn in Virgo,
Um,
or is it in
I
Leo?
I think he is, and I can just check for you very quickly. I think he's Leo.
Yeah, it's kind of borderline. It might be late Leo.
His
I
Saturn.
mean, I can look it up. What's the
It's
birth
oh
date be?
wait, it's actually Libra. His Saturn's in Libra. He is a Libra.
Okay.
He is a Libra stellium.
So meeting him was your Saturn return, and then getting married was his Saturn return.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. And that actually brings up that recently you're just getting out of, you just completed your Saturn opposition. Like Saturn's been going through your first house the past few years, which
Oh
can
yeah.
sometimes be a tough transit for like body and sometimes mind, but sometimes it's a period of not great health. And you're also still wrapping up eclipses bouncing back and forth between your first house of self and your seventh house of relationships, which is usually a period of major beginnings and endings, and like ending one chapter and beginning another when it comes to your sense of self and who you are versus your sense of relationships and the people that you're with. And with that activating your entire Virgo stellium, I was just wondering what's been going on the past few years with the Saturn transit and the eclipses.
Man, my health has been just like ridiculously bad. It started off with a rheumatic muscle disorder diagnosis that hasn't really stuck with my rheumatologist. So, some sort of ongoing rheumatic issue. And I also tore my meniscus in my knee. I got Lyme disease the summer of 24, and like that's an ongoing thing. Like
Wow.
so many things have happened with my health during my Saturn opposition in the first house that I was just so stoked to see him go to Aries. Like goodbye, and hopefully my money won't be too crazy this time. But definitely my health was going downhill. But my marriage continues to stay solid. Married in Venus retrograde and all. Like it's probably the most like positive foundational part of my life is the relationship that I have with my husband.
Nice. Have there been any significant changes in his life lately? Like there was the eclipse in September in Virgo, for example, which would have been in your seventh house. And then there was another eclipse that just happened in March that was in your seventh house. And sometimes it's not always like changes happening in our life, but sometimes when we're having seventh house stuff, there's important changes or beginnings or endings going on with our partners around those times.
No, not really. I mean, he would probably say that the changes are going on with me. And I think that this probably started, there was an eclipse in 2023. And I can't remember which one of the houses of mine that it hit, but lots of things just about the way that I thought about the world in general at large started to change with me in 2023. I was very much a scientific minded kind of like materialist, and like I still am, but I that kind of marks the spot of when I really got into astrology. And
Mm,
I started to go down the wormhole of that, and it really has intensified over the past year. So if you talk to my husband, he'll tell you that I just personally am vastly different than I was 3 years ago, because I have made astrology such an important part of like my outside of work activities as a hobby.
got it. Yeah, 2023 was, I remember, was the eclipses that were happening in Scorpio, which would be your ninth house of like beliefs, but also astrology and like world outlook and philosophy. But also Uranus was opposing your natal Uranus in the ninth house at that time. So your Uranus opposition had to do with beliefs and like philosophy, and even like sometimes the ninth house is like religion. So at that time, that transit for you was, and the major beginnings and endings was getting into astrology and how that changed compared to your worldview up to that point.
Yeah, again, just very much a materialist, but just not that way anymore. My husband calls me woo woo, and I lean into that a little bit because I think that it's cute and it's funny. But I just have my mind more expanded. I am more willing to hear people's thoughts about just the way that everything is. That my belief system has completely been altered, like thrown upside down completely since the 2023 eclipses that happened in my ninth house.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's the tension. I mean, because sometimes when a partner goes through a deep change like that, it can be a little tough for the other partner who still is the previous way.
Yeah, it's hard for him to get used to.
So that's been an area of tension for you, is over the past 3 years, you've gotten heavy into astrology and that's changed your worldview, whereas he's not necessarily on board with that and still has more of a skeptical sort of orientation towards that.
Less skeptical. He's coming along because astrology continues to prove itself every day. But he was skeptical at the beginning,
Hmm.
and he's sliding down more my way of thinking every day. Just just because of current events and paradigm shifting. I think Saturn Neptune probably has a lot to do with this too, like what is real and what isn't. These kind of determinations that we're all thinking every day. It's not necessarily a point of tension, but it is something very different that he has to get used to about me.
Yeah, I mean that can be. I've seen different versions of that just because it's the ninth house, so that can be astrology in this particular instance. But I've seen other instances of that where one partner goes through a religious conversion, and then that can be really tough for the other partner, and to have a partner go through this transformation of their worldview. And I think thinking about that from the other perspective, if I wasn't an astrologer, I could see how that could be tough for the other partner if they didn't resonate with that, or if it wasn't something they were fully on board with. So that kind of
Yeah.
makes sense in terms of the seeing the trigger for you, which was your Uranus opposition, which is funny because like Uranus is oftentimes the thing that you don't expect. It's something that comes out of left field. It's a curveball, and it's also something different and unique and like innovative, but also can be weird or eccentric. And it's really funny that for you, that Uranus opposition, where sometimes that's the midlife transit that happens in the early 40s, and sometimes that's
Yeah.
the person runs off and buys a red sports car thing. But for you, it was person gets into astrology and it really has a
Yeah.
deep change on their worldview, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened. And I have been trying to kind of like think back to like what is the transit that sparked all of this? It's the Uranus opposition in the ninth that like lit me up and out of the blue. No one would have expected scientific Charlene, all right, to go down this woo-woo lane. Like there's just no way that if I would have talked to myself 10 years ago and said that, hey, like you're going to be like a baby astrologer here in about 10 years, I would have laughed and laughed and laughed. I would have never ever thought that that would have been a path that I would have gone down, and neither would have anybody that has known me either. No one would have expected that, but like that's it.
Right. That's really funny. Yeah, that's brilliant. So, but so then, so I'm looking at like, for example, there was an eclipse in May of 2023 that was in Scorpio, and I'm wondering if that wasn't, do you know when you said 2023 and you mentioned eclipses, so that was the one I immediately thought of, but do you know what the time frame was in 2023 when you got into astrology?
It was about Okay. So I got the job that I'm working at right now. I started in April of 2023. And before I started this job, I was laid off. I had a dream about 2 months before I started this job and being laid off that I was looking at a piece of paper and someone was saying, the rail is coming in from Wilmerding. And I could see this black and white piece of paper in my dream, and when I woke up, I told my husband immediately that I had the strangest dream that I was looking at some paper and they were talking about a rail coming in from Wilmerding. And I was like, where is Wilmerding? What does this mean? It was so vivid and
Hmm.
whatever. So 3 months later, I'm at a new job, a new completely different field. I went from finance to manufacturing. And the plant that I work at has fluids coming in via rail on the train. And our second plant is in Wilmerding. All right. We're
Wow.
located in a place called Ambridge. My second plant is in a place called Wilmerding. And we receive fluids coming in from a rail. And I'm looking at the piece of paper that I saw in my dream. All right. So I started that job April of 23, right before the eclipse. And now the Jupiter return is about to happen, and it looks like I'm about to be promoted. And like as I've worked this job, I've had so many experiences of I've done this before. This is what you're supposed to be doing, especially as I help people in their personal life outside of work, because I have befriended all of the people that I work with at this job, like all of them. And I help them, whatever they need, whether it be work or something personal. And it just seems like this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Nice. I love that. The eclipse that happened in April when you got the job was in your second house in Aries, and then the next eclipse was in your ninth house, and then that sort of began the series of eclipses that would bounce back and forth between your ninth and your third for or had been happening a little bit, but would for a little bit longer after that. And that's really cool about the dream. Like I used to be skeptical of that, but I've had instances like that as well. Like last fall, I had a dream about like my websites getting hacked, and it was about a month before that actually happened. And I thought that was bizarre at the time, but it's made me more open to things like that because I've had things like that periodically as well. But it's something until you experience it firsthand, you wouldn't think that that's like an actual thing.
I mean, it definitely sounds like some BS. Like if somebody was telling me this story, but like it really did
Right.
happen. And like I was asking my husband, like, where is Wilmerding? Like I heard of that place, but like where is it? And like he didn't know, and I didn't know, and it was just strange to be then like a few months later, like literally holding the paper in my hand that I dreamt about. I dropped it. Like when I realized like that was the paper from my dream, I physically dropped the paper, and it was like, oh, I guess I am supposed to be here. And that was it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think things like that happen probably because I don't know what the mechanism is, but that if astrology exists and fate exists and there's some form of our lives being mapped out ahead of time, then it just seems like occasionally people have a dream where they get insight into that future for some reason or a glimpse into that, and it's probably tapping into something similar to whatever the underlying system of fate or something is that's underlying astrology to begin with. And I don't know what that is, but those two things might be related in some way.
Definitely. I remember like seeing Sylvia Brown on Montel Williams back when I was in high school. And she was talking about deja vu and kind of like precognitive dreams. And I liked her explanation of that's a marker on a roadmap. It's a little like just a little wink to you, letting you know that you're on the right path. Like if you were going down the road and you saw a sign that said, Pittsburgh 22 miles, you know that you're on the right path. That's what deja vu and precognitive dreams are. It's just a little wink to let you know that you're on the right path. It resonated with me, so I just kind of like continue to believe that.
Hmm. I like that. All right, so let me see. So back to the chart. The last thing was just so I mean with because that's one of the interesting things. It's like so there was some, when I originally asked, was there any tensions or was anything going on with your partner? And you were like, no, not necessarily, but this has been a big change for you that started at the beginning of like Saturn going through your first house, and then you're now on the other side of that. So it's probably started to calm down somewhat now that Saturn's no longer opposing your seventh house Saturn. But there were some like tensions or things going back and forth as you were defining like yourself and this new sense of identity that you have in some ways through some of these new beliefs versus how that impacts your relationship and your partner. But it's not something initially when I asked the question that you sort of recognized as something that was a big issue or something that's been happening, right?
Right. I mean, just like talking about it to you kind of unpacked that and made me realize, oh wait, that is a thing,
Right.
that we not only like went through, but like continue to kind of go through as like he adjusts to the change too. But he's on board now.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the purpose or the function of astrology for me is when I can sit down here as an objective observer of a person's life and I know nothing about you. This is like the first day we've ever met or talked. I
Yeah.
have, this your birth chart and I know a little bit about your transits, your recent ones, the slow moving outer planet ones and the eclipses. So I have some clues about some things I would think should be going on, but then through the dialogue, we're able to uncover that together, sort of like the sequence and the unfolding of things that's been happening for you, not just throughout your life, but especially over the past few years. And we go through a process together through the dialogue of clarifying and understanding it better together as we go, the further we talk and the more we look into and start to understand it better through the context of what you know about your life and what I know about the astrology. And that's the dialogue essentially about a person's fate or whatever you want to call it that yeah, I think is really the purpose of astrology. And it's one of the things I really like about it. And that's why I like having these conversations.
Yeah, it was really cool. One thing, let me add one more thing too that was like an occurrence that happened. And I don't know if this was actually around an eclipse, but again, I'm adopted by family, but I never knew who my birth father was.
Mm.
I had very vague details about it, but I did find out who my birth father was in June of 2025. I took a DNA test, like one of those online DNA tests, and they upload the results. And that was back in like 2017-ish, 2016-ish. Let the results hang out there. Over the years, people have contacted me, but it was actually for the part of my family that I had a connection to. And then out of the blue, somebody contacted me that was actually from my birth side, my father's birth side. And with a conversation with her and a little bit of like moderate genealogy just through public sources, we got it confirmed who he was. I even got a picture. I do still have like a connection to my biological mom. So I hit her up just to confirm if the picture that I had was the right person. And she said that it was. So I found out who my birth father was in June of 2025, which was that was like a big deal for me. Not that I ever wanted to have a relationship with him or anything like that, but I definitely wanted his medical history because I was going through so many health problems at the time.
Mm.
And I found out that he actually passed of cancer in the year 2000 at the age of
Wow.
40. He died of lung cancer. I quit smoking that next day, but I did find out his information in June of this past year, and I don't remember if that was around an eclipse or not.
Do you happen to know the date or approximately?
Of when I found out of who he
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, I can probably tell you here in a second. Um, it was. Oh, I thought it was June. but it was May 22nd of 2025.
May 22nd. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, trying to remember what else was going on in May of 2025, but here's the transits. So the south node's going through your seventh still. The eclipses were already starting to happen there. Jupiter's transiting through your fourth house, and then it sextiles your natal Jupiter almost exactly in the ruler of your ascendant, like there in the sixth house. And the sun is just ingressed into your fourth house as well. Um, yeah, it might have been. I'm trying to think if there's anything more significant going on than just having that Jupiter transit going on. What's the chat say? Not sure. So you found out then, and how did you know? So you knew your biological mother and who she was, but you didn't know who your biological father was until this point?
Yes, because I was adopted by family, so they still maintained a relationship with my biological mother.
Okay, got it. Well, that's just interesting in terms of the Sun Saturn conjunction there, that you have natally as part of your Virgo stellium, as well as how that's like squaring Neptune, and just that there was some lack of clarity surrounding that, and that he was somebody that was just like a question mark for most of your life up until this point. Like when you're already, in your 40s at this point, by the time you finally learn who he was and you learn about that side of things. Do you happen to know when he passed away? Because you mentioned 2000, and I know there was stuff that was like shifting from Taurus into Gemini around that point, especially Saturn. The following year, I think in 2020, in 2001.
Not offhand. I want to say that it was November, but I don't know the exact date.
Okay. Um, I was just curious in terms of yeah, sometimes we have transits that are happening in our chart. Like, for example, Jupiter in that year was transiting through your fourth house, but also
Yeah.
So was Saturn. Saturn was in the process of going through your fourth, and sometimes we have transits and something important happens in our life or to the people around us in our lives who affected our lives, but we don't always know about it until later on. And that's one of the most fascinating phenomenon for me in astrology is sometimes when you do find out about something, looking up the transits at that time to see what was going on. So, yeah, whenever it was in 2000, it's just interesting that you were having a Jupiter transit through your fourth house around then, and then when you actually found out who he was, yeah, Jupiter was back there again.
I think so. It was Jupiter in the fourth house was noticeable for me. And then as you started doing webinars about reoccurrence transits, I thought about the Saturn Sun conjunction that was happening then. That's really the only thing that came to mind when I noticed the date.
Yeah, sure. All right. I'm trying to think of any other questions I have, but we've covered like a lot. This has been actually really, really interesting. Is there anything worth mentioning as parting thing before we wrap up?
No, I'm an open book if you ever have any more questions, though.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I would love to hear how, we still got some further eclipses going on through actually, let me just put that back to where the transits are today. Um, yeah, just like continued eclipses as you wrap up that eclipse series in your first house and your seventh house, and continuing to negotiate that difference between your emerging sense of self and identity and who you are versus how you are in relationships and the room that makes for partnership. And what I usually see is people seesaw back and forth for a few years during that time, sometimes giving more weight to developing their own identity and their own needs and wants versus other times trying to make more room for their partner or trying to be accommodating or do the things that are necessary to maintain, a healthy relationship. And that'll probably be a continuing ongoing theme for you a little bit as you finish up that eclipse series in your first and seventh house. Although it's nice that with Saturn out of your first, that some of the heaviness of that has finally lifted, and hopefully some of the health things that you've been dealing with for the past 3 years will lighten up at this time as well.
Yep, I'm hoping so too. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, awesome, cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to do it anytime.
Okay, awesome. Take care.
All right, you too.
All right. So we'll just turn off your audio and video and we'll leave it in the panel. That way you can stay in the meeting. But all right, that was awesome. It was a really good example. We learned a lot of stuff and yeah, that brought up a lot of different points that we could have, spent the entire time on. We could have gone into more, but it was nice seeing some of the different things we did and yeah, talking about and identifying like through the course of that different things about the how the chart matched the life story. Yeah, it really was an episode unto itself. Um, okay. I'm gonna get another drink because I drank all my coffee and then I'll come back and we'll do the next one. So Jennifer, you were the next that had the three siblings. Let me know if you're still here and if you're up for joining me to share your chart right now. Let me know in the live chat. Thanks for joining me. I think you've got to hit the mute button just to unmute it. There we
There we
go.
go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Okay. All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, what's your birth data?
8/28/73.
Okay, so here's the chart, and in your description, you said that you discovered three siblings you didn't know you had
Yeah.
on Ancestry.com, and one was
Yeah.
a full sibling, and now you've become close to the full sibling.
Correct. Yeah. Just started a couple years ago. Um, Back in February of 24, one of the siblings' daughters reached out to me. And through that year, um, I had another sibling reach out to me. And then they got me in contact with someone who I thought was just another half sibling. Um, and I actually thought I knew who this half sibling's father was. And it turned out to be mine. She ended up coming back to me on Ancestry and saying, we're a full sibling. We're full matches.
Wow, okay. All
Yeah.
right, so
Yeah.
for the audio listeners, for the chart, we're looking at a chart with Leo rising, and the ruler of the ascendant is the sun, which is in Virgo in the second house, along with the moon. You were born the day of a new moon in Virgo. And then, since we're talking about siblings, we're automatically looking at the third house, and your third whole sign house is Libra, where we find Venus in her own sign, along with Pluto and Uranus. And then, they have a square from Saturn, which is in Cancer, in the 12th house in a night chart. So there's some challenges going on there. And then um, we're also, obviously, by extension, thinking about the fourth house as well of parents. And we see your IC is in Scorpio in the fourth whole sign house, and the ruler is Mars, which is in Taurus in the 10th in the sign opposite to its domicile. So what was the setup like growing up wise, or what was the baseline of
Um,
of how you grew up or what your parents' situation was before this situation happened?
Yeah, the irony, I guess, through all of this was so it was growing up. It was just my brother and I. So I just, to my knowledge, I had one other sibling who's 2 years younger. But my dad, I
And
remember,
that relationship, it's like you have
is
Venus in
good.
yeah, so Venus is in the third house in the
Mhm.
night chart, and I expect that, there to be some good things there. So you had a good relationship growing
Yeah,
up with your one sibling.
Right. Yeah, we did. And the home life was tumultuous for sure. Parents divorced, they should have. And but my dad, I remember making jokes that if my mom thought about getting pregnant, she would get pregnant, which never really made sense to me because there was only two of us. Um, but there were different things that were mentioned sort of throughout growing up. Grandparents talking about them living in sin, making a huge deal out of them living together before they were married, and just all sorts of little things that would crop up. Um, so as time went on, my mom actually did tell me that she had given up two siblings for adoption. Um, and at one point, she told me that one of them was a full sibling, but I didn't believe her at all. I don't speak to her anymore. Very toxic. Um, and so shortly after that, I did the ancestry DNA thing. And
And that was in
with
2020. Did you say
and this
four?
was in so I did it in December of 23 was when I took the test. And then the results, I started getting hit up February of 24, um, basically by one sibling, and then May of 24, and then June of 24. So by that summer, so from February through the end of June of 24, I had connected with all three of them at that point.
Got it. Okay. I'm just looking to see what
Yeah.
was going on. We can see that the nodes are going through your third house. The south node's going through your third house. So you start having eclipses there basically. Actually, that, yeah, because that 20, that means that Libra eclipse famously in like October of 2020, or not
Yeah,
October, in,
which would have been when I ordered the test.
so you ordered the test
Yeah,
in,
I ordered it because it took a while to like get there and then get actually do it and then get the result. So
so the eclipse I was talking about was in October of 2023 in Libra in your third house. Are you saying it was that early or?
yeah, that's when I would have started the process to take the test for ancestry.
Nice. Okay. So, and
Yeah.
this was a solar eclipse in Libra, and it was at 21 degrees of Libra, which is actually conjunct to your Uranus in the third house, the planet of like unexpected things, of like curveballs.
Yeah.
In the last chart example, we were talking about Uranus in the ninth house and how that brought an unexpected change and shift in terms of a person's beliefs and getting into astrology. And here we have an activation also with eclipses. You know, hers was in the ninth house, yours was in the third house, and it's like
Yeah.
you start the process of doing ancestry and discover that you have siblings that you didn't know about, which was completely unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I knew I had two, but I really wasn't expecting much. And I just really didn't fully believe kind of with the stories that I don't know, as things just didn't match up. So that's when I took that. Yeah. Mhm.
What was your motivation for doing it? Just that you wanted to sort out
I
some of the
wanted,
things you.
yeah, I wanted some clarification. I felt that there was a lot of deception growing up, just with regards to family situations and the stories. Some things just didn't line up. Um, I just had a feeling, and um, it was just crazy how rapidly the results and the cascade of events that took over that next year. Um, and it was really emotional. Yeah, it was a lot to process, honestly. Um, feeling lied to by my dad, feeling like just all kinds of things. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So we had this first eclipse, which is in Libra, and that's you starting the process. But then I remember that one because then there was another eclipse in Taurus at the very end of that month. So that's in your 10th house. but it was at 5 degrees of Taurus, I believe, which would have been right on top
Hmm.
of your Mars, which is the ruler of the fourth house of parents. So that's interesting
Yeah.
how, part of the
And a lot of
dynamic.
public, I was a lot of displayed anger over some of it, to be honest.
Okay,
Just
yeah, you were pissed off once you found out
yeah.
what the truth.
Yeah, like just feeling because I specifically asked my dad point blank if the sibling that had been given up, that my mom said was his, and he said no, that it was not, that he would never do that. And he's already passed away. He had already passed away by this point, so I could not confront or ask him or anything. Um, I've since
Okay.
made peace with it, but the initial shock um, was a lot.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, one of the things interesting about these two eclipses, though, is this is happening as you're beginning this process, but it's like eclipses last, they have like a 6 month window of sort of like impacting things, but you couldn't have known at this stage. You're just in the early stages as those eclipses are happening, and that's one of the things I always note about eclipses, how sometimes it's like a small beginning that you don't always know that it's going to be a major a major beginning until later
Yeah,
on, because something is
yeah,
planted at the time that'll grow and develop for a while in the
right.
future. So you begin the
Yeah.
process in October, and then what happens in December?
So December was when I took the test. So
Okay.
I started the process like ordering and all that stuff, took the test,
Hmm.
got the results back, and then started getting contacted by my siblings. Um,
Starting when? What happened after December?
February 28th of 2024 was the very first contact. And that would have been with the first half sibling through my mom.
February 28th. Okay. So
Mhm.
February 28th, and you were contacted by the first half sibling through your mom.
Yeah, yeah.
Got it. Okay. So this is just a little bit before the next eclipse season will begin, and that was late February. And then
Mhm.
when is the second one?
So, and then May 20th was when I found out I had a half sibling on my dad's side as well through my dad. So,
Uh, what was the impact of the first one, if any?
the first one was um, it was his daughter. He actually did not want to have really any relationship. She was doing it to try and figure out her family tree. Um, and I found out like they had actually met with my mom and it didn't go well.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, so
So
it
I'm
was
just
it was just kind of like there was just a lot of sort of validation of who my mom is as a person that
got
I
it.
was
Okay.
sort of coming to terms with as well. Um, that she just was not a good mom.
So and
And
she hadn't told you about that they had already met?
no, no, not at all. She told me that she had just given up kids. Like she's never met them. She had no idea where they were, how they existed, or
Hmm.
anything about them. And come to find out, she met both. Yeah. And my dad
Like
never
a
said
while
anything.
before this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like a good 5 and 7 years prior to this. Like
Got it.
flew
Okay.
back to where they were to meet them. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so well that I mean there's probably some interesting transits there that were happening at the time, but we'll
Yeah.
skip over that for now. But
Mhm.
so in March, it's like we get the second set of eclipses. There was I believe this is a lunar eclipse in Libra in your third house, conjunct Pluto. Not long after the contact with the first sibling happens, and then you
Mhm.
said it was June that you talked to the other two.
Yeah. So, and then I think so in between that time, that one niece was, she thought she knew who the other sibling was, from my mom's side. So she had her take an ancestry test. And then that's when, in June, she got the results back and reached out to me. So sometime between February and June, that other sibling had taken the test. And it takes like 6 weeks to actually take it, send it off, get the results back, all that stuff.
Okay.
And then she told me that we were in fact full siblings. She was born 5 years prior to me.
Got it. Okay. So, and I'm seeing like, Uranus is stationing all over your midheaven and opposing your IC. So this is some of the upsetting, surprising, like parent
Yeah,
stuff that you're finding
yeah,
out. You
yeah.
have like a,
Uranus ran roughshod over me. Like,
yeah. And then you have like a Mars return in June. So Mars is conjoining your natal Mars, which is the ruler of your fourth house. And then we see even the South Node is like now moving over your Venus at this time. Um, okay, so this is a was a big deal, and this was
yeah.
almost 2 years ago now. Have
Mhm.
you? I'm trying to think of, are there any more like short-term things that are
Yeah.
important that happened, or can I ask like
Um, so
long-term things?
it took about a year, I think, for all of us to sort of process what we had
Hmm.
all discovered and found out. And so just to kind of fast forward to 2025, so a year later, we ended up moving out of state. And I ended up on the way here, stopped and met one of the half siblings. So the one with my dad, she lives in Dallas. I'm now in Houston. And so I stopped and met her, and we talk every couple of weeks or month or whatever. Everything's good. And the my full sibling, my sister, still weird to say, is still in St. Louis where I was born, and making a trip to go back and see her in a couple of months, when I'm back from my niece's graduation, high school graduation. So um, it went from just like out of the blue, a lot of crazy and a lot of emotion for all of us,
Hmm.
to really kind of settling in. And over, 2025, now we're talking about maybe doing like a sister's trip later this year. So
Nice.
yeah.
So you've,
And weirdly, and my brother wants nothing to do with any of it. Like he
mm.
accepts the information, but then he's done. Like he just has zero interest. But I'm
S-
happy that it all came out.
Your brother that you grew up with doesn't have any
Hmm.
interest. Okay.
No, none at all. None at all.
Versus
And
the three new siblings, are they all women?
right. No, the one male half sibling through my mom, he doesn't want anything to do with it either. And really, they're both Scorpios,
Got it. Okay. So, but the two
which is
half
nice.
siblings,
Hmm.
right, are
Yeah.
both women
No,
and
my full sibling and the half sibling on my dad's side, I'm both are girls, and both sisters in very good relationships with now.
got it. Okay. So you've been able to basically develop or cultivate like a pretty good relationship with the two of the
Yeah.
new siblings that you discovered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. That's beautiful. Um,
Yeah.
okay. So where are we at then in that case? So what happened then, or what's the timeline in terms of like what was the implication of that for what was happening with your parents' marriage? Does that mean so you're
So
born and then was he having children secretly outside of the marriage, or was this before
no,
the
so what
marriage,
happened
or
was, so my mom had given up a child at 16 and then one at 18. My dad had given one up at 18.
okay.
So yeah, 16.
And then they had you.
Sorry. So she gave up 16. My dad gave one up at 18. Then they gave up my full sibling when my mom was 20. and my dad was 2020, or my dad was 25, and then they had me when they were 25 and 30. So she was, um, my full sibling was born 5 years before me. So what happened, what now I understand though, is my grandparents who were all about them living in sin and all the stuff, like all the stuff that kept coming up because my mom got pregnant and they moved in together. She had the baby, they gave the baby up for adoption, continued to live together, got married and had me. So it was just which I still don't understand why. They were just two red flags together. They should have never, but um I
I
guess
mean, is part
that was sort of what was interesting because the way that I always understood it was, they met, it was great, they moved in. Yes, they lived together for a year before they, got married and had me, but that was just not the story at all. Like they had been together, she got pregnant, they moved in together, lived together for 5 years, and then um, you know, gave up a child and all of this, which makes so much more sense why both of their parents were really leery of them and everything. So it was just, you kind of like realize, or I appreciated more the world that I came into
mhm,
and understood that so much of the chaos and ill will that was already there just had nothing to do with me. And so that
right.
was a really important part of this journey, right?
What
Because,
is
God,
is part of the implication that your grandparents, that there was pressure from the grandparents on the parents, and that's part of why they were giving up because they didn't approve of them having
for
children
sure,
out of
yes, because
wedlock?
one side was very Catholic and the other side was very Southern Baptist. And
Mm,
so there was a lot of pressure on them. This would have been in 1968 when they got pregnant with her before marriage. So,
got it. I was trying to understand because it's like we can see why this is like a prominent part of your chart with the ruler, with like the midheaven is in Taurus in the 10th house, and the ruler is Venus, which is in Libra in the third house of siblings. And Venus, though, is co-present or sign-based conjunction with Uranus, and there's a unexpected or weird component of things, but then Pluto's there as well, and that Pluto is like really closely square Saturn in the 12th house, and the 12th house can have to do with
mhm.
secrets or things that are hidden or sometimes loss. And Saturn is like squaring that Pluto really tightly in the third house of siblings. But the third house can also have to do with, if the fourth house is parents, the third house can sometimes have to do with grandparents. And I'm wondering
Yeah,
how much with that Saturn Pluto square, a lot of the stuff that happened with your siblings wasn't due to the tensions with the grandparents and the parents that
yeah. My
led to
grandparents played a very big role in my life as well. So,
okay.
yeah, my dad's parents were always present, and my mom's parents just played a significant role more behind the scenes. But
Mm,
they were all four very present, um, good, bad, and ugly growing up. So,
okay. Got it.
mhm,
Um, all right. Well, I think
yeah,
that makes sense then in terms of all of that, and that's great that again, like we had eclipses activating that house in your chart, and then that began this process of discovering that you had siblings that you didn't know about, and then eventually building relationships with them, and then hopefully that continuing to just be like a positive thing in terms of building positive familial relationships with people that you didn't know up to this point, but doing it later in
yeah,
life. And it reminds me of like, I used an example in the third house episode of like Jack Nicholson, who had the ruler of the third house was like retrograde, and he grew up thinking that the person that was his his biological mother was like his sister, and then later in life they discovered that that wasn't the case at all, that his bio who he thought was his sister was actually his mother, due to similar dynamics in terms of early societal pressures on families that have like children outside of marriage being different, decades ago than they are today, especially in a religious
For sure.
context. But it's interesting that the eclipses brought to light something that was previously hidden, which is an interesting
Mhm.
thing in terms of that being part of something that was built into your chart, but something that you wouldn't discover until much later on.
Yeah, yeah. And just on a little side note, I had met with an astrologer a few years prior to all of this going on, and she had noted that I was born on a new moon, and she was kind of gathering some data, and she asked if there was any any secrets in my family, and I'm like, no, we're pretty standard, like nothing, no big
Right.
secrets. Sorry, I can't, nothing for your data or whatever. And then it was like 3 years later, all of this came out, and I was like, oh, so
Right. Well, it's
yeah,
like the sun and the moon in your chart are both like square Neptune pretty closely, and I don't know if that's what she was picking up on, but that can,
yeah,
having both of the significators, so the mother and the father, both having a hard aspect with the planet that can indicate illusions or deceptions or things that seem one way but are actually another. But that's so funny that you had that experience with that reading, because that I have to
yeah,
say that that's like one of the worst experiences as a consulting astrologer, is like you say something that seems pretty straightforward in the chart, but the person's just like,
yeah,
no, that there's nothing, that doesn't land. And it's because either it hasn't happened yet or the person doesn't know about it. And
yeah,
that's one of the biggest, like, trickiest things with doing astrological research, because obviously there's a third scenario, which is that just the answer is no, that they made a
yeah.
statement that wasn't true about the person's life, and that interpretation just doesn't land at all. But
Hmm.
those other two scenarios are the ones we always have to be careful about, because sometimes, yeah, that's part of it, is it may not be evident yet, or especially if you're doing consultations with somebody that's younger, there's so much of their life that just hasn't unfolded yet, even
Oh
though
yeah,
the birth chart's saying there's something important there.
yeah. I've definitely from being in astrology from when I was a teenager, and I look at I think about having a reading then as opposed to now, in my 50s, and um yeah, just so many things that wouldn't have played out or would have hit differently. And I think it's all wonderful, but definitely there's something to be said for, having a few more years and seeing your chart sort of play out in different ways, and how different transits hit differently. So yeah, because I would have
Yeah.
never seen this coming in a million years.
Right. Yeah. That's really funny. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a great example, and we learn a lot from that, just from your experience. So thanks for sharing that with us. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right. Take care.
All right. Have a good day.
Awesome. That was really great. That was really great. Let me take a look at the chat. Okay. Ray, are you still here? Yours was the original one that I was going to do next. Yeah? Okay. Hey, thanks for joining me.
How you doing?
Doing
Can
all
you hear
right?
me? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right. What is your birth data?
January 2nd, 1970.
All right. Is your ascendant 29 Cancer?
Yeah, sorry, it's a very late degree. I know that gets tricky. Uh,
Yeah, that is my worst
that's that
consultation
yeah, I
nightmare.
know. And I tell you, it's the time on my birth certificate. So
All
um
right. So let's do animate chart. Okay, here we go. So here's the chart. So your birth time on the birth certificate is 6:12 p.m., which is not around a time. That's obviously a very specific time. The ascendant at that time, at the beginning of that minute, is 29 degrees and 14 minutes. Let me see how
it's
long.
like
If I
4 more minutes, it becomes a Leo rising now.
Okay, yeah. So it's not until 616-ish that it switches over to Leo rising. So
Mm.
we're probably safe treating it as a Cancer rising chart.
It does read well in any other quadrant houses, and I tell you, I don't know, just it keeps me kind of agitated that it's not just clear cut, you know.
Yeah, well, I will like normally if this is a consultation and I had an hour to 2 hours, I would quickly like either quickly or throughout the course of talking to you, I would rectify the chart. And I may still do that in the back of my mind, but we're going to approach it from a
Yep, that's
default
fine.
of assuming it's Cancer rising, and I'll approach it from that perspective. But I'll let you know if that changes wildly during the course of this.
Okay.
Um, so let's see. So we've got a chart with 29 Cancer rising for those listening to the audio version, and the sun is in Capricorn at 12 degrees. So you were born a bit after sunset, and this is
Okay.
firmly a night chart with Venus and Mercury also in the seventh whole sign house. And Venus is your most positive planet then because it's a night chart and the seventh house of relationships. Your most challenging
And
planet
Saturn is
is
the most difficult. I mean, you can watch it walk its way around it, my chart. I mean, just one thing, leading devastation all the way through.
Yeah, so Saturn is your most challenging planet since it's a night chart and it's up in Taurus in the 11th whole sign house, and it's actually stationing on that day, which makes Saturn a little bit louder. Um, okay, so let me pull up the description. You had actually a very lovely written description that I'll just read really quickly, where you said that you married your high school sweetheart at 17 and
Yep,
stepped into adulthood fast,
yep,
leaving school to support a growing family through years of poverty, multiple jobs, and even losing everything before
yep.
eventually rebuilding and creating stability, all while remaining devoted to your wife of 38 years. Later, discovering your true parentage and suffering a life-altering back injury in 2020 forced you to confront both identity and limitation, making a shift from a life defined by survival and responsibility to one shaped by reflection, resilience, and a search for deeper meaning.
Yep.
First off, I have to say you're an excellent writer, and that's a great synopsis. When I asked people to write like a summary of their life, I was not expecting one to be as well done as that. So
Well,
thanks
actually,
for
I wrote it before. I saw your thing come to my email, so I hurried. I said, I'm gonna try to get on there this time.
nice. Well,
I worked on it for like an hour.
that's really good and really self-reflective. Let me see. So the other thing, oh, so you also have so Cancer rising, and the ruler of your ascendant is the moon, which is in Scorpio in the fifth whole sign house in the place of children.
I had
So
three.
and you have three children? Okay. Um,
and
yeah,
and
so
coming from like I guess a tough story, you know, teenage parents. I was 17. We quit school. We got married. We had then we had three children. So very young parents. But I got so you talk about luck there. That was I got three awesome kids, and we had great relationships. All my kids are very successful. Coming from like an after school special, uh, parents. It really worked out good.
nice. I love that. Having the ruler of your ascendant in the fifth house, and usually you would delineate that as if there's something about your overall life direction where the topic of children or other fifth house themes would be central or very important to your overall life direction. And that's cool that you've had three children and that's been an area of success and like positive things for you.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other area of success has been your marriage, that you met your partner in high school and fell in love, and just having the most positive planet in your chart, Venus, in the seventh house of relationships, and that being again an area where things have gone relatively well, it sounds like is another area of like good fortune for you, we would say.
Yes. Yep. Through the good times and the bad, we've been together. So
Got it. Okay.
mhm.
Um, so I'm trying to think of where should we start or what should we get into first beyond those? I mean, I do have a question in terms of like what's the Saturn doing in your 11th house then? That's in the area of friends and groups. So I would assume that there's been some hardship or some loss or some challenges regarding friends and groups.
Well,
Sometimes when sat
I've always kind of thought of it, I'm not a joiner. I would say if there was you know, um, I've never been one to join the group, so I don't know if
yeah,
that's it.
I've met some people over the years where sometimes when they have Saturn in the 11th house, there can be some fears surrounding
Mhm.
groups and friendships and things like that about putting themselves out there. And as a result of that, sometimes they deliberately kind of avoid going out into either social situations or forming friendships as a result of that. Is that something that's always been the case for you, or is that something where there was an experience that led to that, or where does that come from?
I don't know where not I've always had like one friend at a time. So I've had,
Hmm.
then that friend would go away and I get another one friend and it would be, just just that. Never like a group of I
Okay.
did never belong to any kind of groups or anything like that.
Well, one of
I
the
don't know
things that's
why. Just yeah, I guess you would say shy,
shyness,
not
yeah,
wanting to
that
join,
could
not
be.
a joiner.
That makes sense. Yeah, well, one of the things that's nice is just um, that Venus at 6 degrees of Capricorn is trining your Saturn through a superior trine in a night chart, so that Venus
Yeah, mutual
ha
reception too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because Saturn's in Venus's sign and Venus is in Saturn's sign, but those are two mitigating factors that makes the Saturn placement not as difficult as it would be otherwise, which is both a positive thing in terms of some of the 11th house stuff, as well as Saturn ruling the seventh house of relationships, but it also nicely offsets a little bit the opposition that Saturn has to Jupiter and the moon, where the moon is like separating from Jupiter and Saturn, and it's applying that sextile with Venus, which is probably a helpful like offsetting factor in terms of like the topic of children going relatively well for you, for example.
I kind of thought that because you have the moon in Scorpio, but it's like a benefic enclosure, right? So between the Jupiter and the Venus, I mean, so yeah, making it more positive, I think.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Um, so where should we start though? I'm sort of talking about it from a technical standpoint, but what are the parts of your life story maybe we haven't gotten into yet? You said there was an important turning point at one point in 2020.
2020 was when I fell off the cliff basically in my life. But yeah, that's right there during the when all the COVID stuff started.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was like a pile up in Capricorn
Capricorn, yeah,
and Aquarius.
yeah. And when it March 13th, well, like I said, you can watch Saturn starting from my Saturn return in 98. Um, just as it walks around, my grandmother died, my grandfather died, we went bankrupt, my dad died, just around the clock, just like it works its way around to
During your
2020.
Saturn return.
Yes, starting at Saturn return in 98, yeah, and then going around, like I said, when you get to 2020, um, I don't know where you want to start, but
Well, I'm interested in that period you're talking about. So tell me about your Saturn return. It sounds like
yeah,
with
Saturn
Saturn.
return, it was June 9th, of 98. Um, you can see Saturn's right there. Uh, that's when my grandmother died, and she was the first of how you have certain people in your life. She was the first to pass, and
Mhm.
then 2 months after that, in August, I end up kind of losing my um, mind. I feel like I've had some psych issues, I guess, through my life, but that was like the first time, and I ended up quitting like the best job I ever had or would ever have in August.
So part of it is like with Saturn ruling the eighth house, sometimes it can bring up issues of mortality when Saturn, like you're having your Saturn return. So that makes sense. And then by August, it's like Saturn's heading towards opposing your moon and you're dealing with some mental health and maybe depression type issues.
Yes, and I ended up that job I quit. I had worked there for 10 years.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
Yeah, and I was a manager, and I um, just couldn't. It seemed like I couldn't take it anymore, and I ended up quitting, and it kind of just changed my life. It was life changing.
It looks like Saturn stationed there in the middle of August at 3 degrees of Taurus, so right on top of your natal Saturn, and opposing your Jupiter and your moon.
Yeah,
And then what else happened during that period, or was that the
that
so
was
this
the
is like the
biggie. Yeah,
height?
yeah, that was yeah. My grandmother died in June. Quit that job in August. That was the big. But like I said, that I guess the mental factor too, just kind of losing it a little bit.
So this might be a good opportunity then to demonstrate what I was saying in the last episode, and I've said about Saturn returns, which is that the Saturn return is the most intense when it goes exact to the degree, which here this is you having it exact to the degree, and you've lost a major person in your life, and you're also dealing with the mental health issues and quitting a job as a result of that. So clearly that was the most intense part of your Saturn return, but then your Saturn return and the approach that I take wouldn't really be over until Saturn departed from Taurus. So there would probably be lingering cleanup from that over the course of the next couple of years, I would guess. Is
Well,
that true? Or
I guess the cleanup would be trying to start life over almost. I had to find a job.
hmm,
Now, like I said, I'd always had multiple jobs, but that was the main job. And at the time, my wife wasn't working. She had been with home with the kids, so I was working a couple of jobs, but that was the main one, and I ended up quitting. So I had to try to. We ended up trying to start life over. Now, the funny thing was, out of all that badness, um, losing my grandmother and losing my job, we ended up buying a house later on. I mean, within the next year. And you say, I don't know what the bank looked at really to give me the loan, but we did. We bought a house and we kind of like started life over. I ended up going to a grocery store, um, and which I had worked at a grocery store when I was younger, so it wasn't totally new to me. And
hmm.
I ended up being there for the next 20 years.
Okay. So you got a job with the grocery store
Hmm.
in 99?
Yes, like in 90, it was yeah, not well, yeah, 99, right in there.
Okay.
98, 99. I was like so that was August of 98. I don't know the exact dates. I didn't start keeping track till I started learning astrology. But then um so it was like I usually put on my application back then. It was like I quit that in August 98 and I started another one in August 98. So it was like I went ahead and immediately looked into and found a job. So within probably the next month or so, I had another job. But the fact is, I kind of quit and left us with nothing. You know what I mean?
Mm,
And it was kind
right.
of,
Just
but
financially.
like I said, it turned into something good. Um,
How long would you say it took? Would you say it took a couple years for things to level out before you sort of came out of that period and were able to build things back up?
I don't know. I would say, it wasn't long after that. And I don't know the exact year we bought the house that we bought. Um, Probably within another year or so. Not exactly sure.
Okay, got it. Um, well, by like 2000, for example, Saturn starts getting out of your 11th house, out of Taurus completely and moving into your 12th. So that would be the official end of like the sign-based Saturn return. So I would expect some of the whatever the mental health issues were and some of the financial stuff that was most acute when your Saturn return was exact around the middle of 1998 through the end of that year would finally be alleviated and you'd be completed that chapter of your life by around 2000, by mid 2000.
Yeah, I would say.
Okay.
And then
Um,
we started a period of just kind of, cruising. Then everything was seemed like it was going okay. The wife was working, I was working. We had a house, the kids were doing great. And it seemed okay. Everything seemed like it was going well. That went on until about 2000 or to 2003, October 3rd, 2003. You can see where Saturn is there. My
your
grandfather
first
died.
house. Okay. So Saturn starts going through your first house. It opposes your
I
sun.
posed as my son, and the guy I was named after, um, I was named after him, and he
Okay.
passed. Very,
Wow.
very, again, a very hard time.
Okay. Yeah. So what else is going on? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, Saturn's opposing your sun, but it's also squaring your IC, applying to that within 3 degrees. And he passes away, and so that's a tough time. And is that tough on you mentally then again?
Everything again. Yes, I went crazy again. um, yes, very much so. And actually, at that point, I started. I guess it was around then I had really started into trying to get mental health. I had gone
Okay.
through a period of that, trying to find. Of course, back then it was harder to find a to get into mental health when you needed it. It wasn't like now where you can just go on a computer and get it. You had to, set an appointment. It was always like 6 months wait time. So by the time it came around, you were feeling better.
Got it.
But
So was your partner helpful though in being helpful or supportive as much as she could while you're going through some of those periods of mental health issues?
yes, well, actually, in that time too, she had lost her grandfather, and the following October of the next year, she loses her father. So um, it was a tough time for all of for both of us, and I guess that's a lot of death. Um, it was very hard, very hard. And then it gets
Yeah.
even. I mean, you keep on going to 2006,
So
and
hold on
that's
just
when
a
the
sec.
uh,
So one of the things I wanted to mention is just it seems like one of the recurring themes is just the with the Moon Saturn opposition, like issues of mental health coming up as a recurring theme, and that's more central for you because the moon's the ruler of the ascendant and because it's a night chart. But then it's like you have a great partner who's trying to be there for you and is helping to offset it to some extent, and that's probably one of the things that's helping to break that opposition so that it's like imagine if you didn't have that for example, that maybe it would have been harder with that opposition to get some of the help that you needed or to navigate some of those periods of difficult mental health.
yeah,
Would you say that's correct, or is
I'd
that
say that's
re
correct. Yeah, having her, it was definitely uh, she was the rock.
hmm, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then you were talking about 2006?
Yeah, so then 2006, that's the first time I hurt my back, or first major time. I was out of work for, I don't know the exact date, other than I would say it was um early or yeah, 2000, yeah, early 2006. I don't know the exact date. But anyway, that was the first time I hurt my back. We ended up going bankrupt and lost the house.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, I see Saturn has just like gone into your first house or sorry, into your second house of finances. And so it's opening up a period of difficult financial times
And we
for
did.
two.
We went bankrupt. I was out of work. I was out of work for a year. We lived on her income. Had to move back in with my parents, which I had been gone since I was 17. So that was, I mean, we had to live there for just a little while we found another apartment that we could get,
You're,
just on her income. And
and
I
you're in
was
your
out
mid
for,
mid 30s.
yeah, and it was a back issue. And
Mm,
so I was out of work for a year at that point. And she, and we ended up losing the house, lost everything, cars, house, everything. Got ended up getting an apartment.
Okay. So that was the beginning of like a really tough financial
Tough
period for you in
time.
2006. And that's
Yeah,
like right after Saturn has gone into Leo, and it would be there for a couple of years because Saturn doesn't depart from Leo until like 2008, like the fall of 2008.
yeah.
Did that
And
financial period start to alleviate by
yes, I
2008?
ended up 2000, yeah, around that time I ended up getting a job back at the grocery store,
Hmm.
and I was back there again. So that was like at, like midway of that 20 some years that I was there. Ended up I went back to work at that same place.
Nice. Okay. So you've got regular employment again, and then that is that the job then that you had for a while after that point?
Yep, ended up same job. Yep, I ended up working there. We ended up buying another house, and that's the house we still live in now.
When,
Um,
what year was that?
2011.
Okay. 2011. Saturn's going through your fourth house. What caused you to get that house at that time? So you had lost a house
Lost the other
previously that
house,
you owned.
and you have to, when you go bankrupt, there's a so many amount of so many years that they don't really give you any. You can't get no credit, basically. Um, so it ends up we went through the years, everything was fine. We ended up buying a car first. That was no problem. Ended up get buying a house because we had been living in the apartment. And it was a kind of small apartment.
That's funny. Did you
Um,
buy the car between 2008 and 2010?
yes, we bought the car first. I would say that was yeah between 2008 and 2010, and
Okay, that
then
was
we
in
got
Saturn's transiting your third house.
yeah, that's funny, isn't it? I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it is
Um,
funny. I don't know. I don't exactly know why it's tracking in terms of Saturn's supposed to be your most difficult planet, but for some reason it's really tracking.
well,
It's
I
for
kind
sure.
of thought too the debt.
Mm,
Sometimes I think of it. I don't know if Saturn could be thought of like that. Debt. Because I go into debt with the car, I go into debt with the house,
the house.
and
Okay. Yeah, you're taking on a
I'll be
huge
paying
amount
for that
of.
house until I'm 70. You know what I mean?
Got it. Okay, yeah, you're taking on a huge amount of responsibility and debt and
Hmm.
making like long-term contractual
There's commitments,
agreements,
yes,
which it's like you've had the
and I don't
experience
like.
of. Right.
I would rather be, I would rather not have that. I say it all the time. Let's move, sell the house and let's go. It's just me and her now. Um, just take off and go somewhere. But anyway,
Got it.
yes, we have the house. So then you get
So,
to go ahead.
so it's so far, and just to summarize what we just saw for the audio people, it's like when Saturn was going through your second house, you suffered a major financial setbacks and had to declare bankruptcy. When Saturn went through your third house, you're rebuilding and you were able to buy a car. And then when Saturn was
Hmm.
going through your fourth house, you were able to buy a house
Hmm.
and
Yep.
taking on more debt each time.
Yeah.
So then what happens after that?
Okay. So then you get to 2013, and then my dad dies on July 3rd, 2013,
July
and you can see
3rd,
like the sun is opposite my sun, and Saturn's like right on the moon or close to it.
July 3rd, 2013.
Yeah.
Saturn is on your So Saturn's at 4 degrees of Scorpio and it's conjoining your Jupiter and your moon. And what was the other one you were pointing out?
The sun opposite my sun.
Yeah, well it's sun opposite Pluto also. Like Pluto's like
Yeah.
even though it's 2 degrees off, Pluto's at
And
10
Pluto's on my
degrees,
sun, right? Exactly.
10 degrees of Capricorn and your sun is at 12. So yeah, that's tough. I was gonna ask about that Pluto stuff because once Pluto got to Capricorn, it started transiting over your Venus and then your Sun. Um, so having the loss of your father was that actually it looks like that's also your Uranus opposition. Uranus is up at like 12 and it's opposing your IC at 15 and opposing your Uranus at 8 degrees of Libra. So was that a big loss for you, or how did that impact you?
Oh yeah, I mean definitely. Like I said, it was one of the. So if I were to say the three, when I talk about the, those the three, close people to me, to my life, both my grandparents, which we did everything with, and then my father, of course.
Hmm.
Of course, if we find out, that's what I said. Found out later that he wasn't my father, and we'll get to that. But you should do like an ancestry episode, ancestry.com versus people's natal charts because it's crazy. That's where
Yeah,
you find out.
I need to get sponsorship by Ancestry at this point because like I am a great obviously like proponent of that at this point with all the people finding out ancestry things. I should look into that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Were there any between 2013 and 20 what 15 Saturn's going through Scorpio, were there any issues that came up with the topic of children at this time?
Not that I recall. I can't recall any. Yeah. So then if you put it to the quadrant house, that goes to my fourth house. So I don't
Hmm.
know. You see that's my same thing. And I go, seems like Saturn
Right.
touches it um works it better in the quadrant than it does in the whole sign. But like I said, I had that late degree and I know you don't want to, we're not talking about that, but we can keep moving. And so then
No,
we
it's
get
okay.
to you
I
want
mean,
to keep
that's a valid point to bring up in terms of like whether the quadrant house overlap, because your fourth house would extend from like 15
hmm
Libra into what, somewhere in like mid Scorpio, depending on
Yeah,
what
mid
system you
Scorpio,
use.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so it's 2013 through 2015. How old are your kids at this point?
So ooh,
Because
um,
it's like eclipses are happening there as well. I see the nodes are like halfway through that sign by 2013. Um,
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think how old the kids were. So 2013, I know, or 2013.
like without
Can't
giving
remember.
their
I still
birth
had two
dates,
with,
do you know their birth years?
yes, my kids, yes. Yeah. My oldest was 88. The second was 90, and the next one was 93.
Okay, so from like 90 to 2000, 2010 would be 20, so they're in their early to mid 20s, give or take,
hmm
around 2013,
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah. And I still
Okay.
had at least one of them here, home here with me, my son.
Did they go off to college or did they
Yes,
stay
at one
home?
point they did, and that might have been. I'm trying to think of what year they went. It was kind of like my son had left, and then we were by ourselves for like the first time, and it was kind of weird. But I can't tell you what year it was. He was only gone for like a year, and he came back. They all finished college, but they lived home with us most of the
The
time.
ru the ruler of the fifth is Mars, which is in the ninth, which could the ninth is the place of like college and higher education. It's also the place of foreign travel and foreign countries, as well as the place of religion and beliefs. Have any of them developed either, let's say, academic orientation or an interest in foreign countries and travel, or alternatively, a focus on religious or like philosophical beliefs?
No, I wouldn't say any of the three. Or
How would you describe them then in
well,
terms
they've all
of,
went to college, so like I have, and we and my wife and I never did. I don't know
okay,
if that
so
makes
so it's like the first in their family to go to college?
Yeah, all three of them graduated from college. Yes.
Did they just do their bachelor's or did they do
My
higher
son
than
is
that?
going to get his master's. My middle, she's a nurse practitioner,
Hmm.
and then my oldest, she's got her bachelor's.
What did the other one get their master's in?
Uh, my son, he's a teacher,
Nice. Okay, he's a
education.
teacher.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
And my daughter,
higher edu what level of education?
which one? All of them?
The one that got the master's, do they do K through 12 or they do college education?
No, the K through 12
Okay,
educate. Well,
that's
my son, he's got he's got his in physical education, and he's gearing to get his master's in adaptive physical education
Okay.
um, for
So two of
handicap.
the handicap education.
Yeah.
So two of them went in a more like medical route, it sounds like.
Yes. My oldest two. Well, yeah. Well, actually, yeah. My oldest daughter, she works for like insurance, so it's in a medical, doing some kind of medical auditing.
Got it. Okay. Just trying to understand how that ruler of the fifth house was manifesting and if it was in any particular way that might like clarify what was going on during that time period when they were all in their mid 20s. It sounds like if they're all in their mid 20s then they would have been at different levels of going through college basically.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that there. What was next on the timeline?
Okay, so keep moving with Saturn. Kind of like in between there, it was a funny time, and I don't know if this would pop up in any way. I did something a little bit different. Um, I ended up becoming a yoga teacher.
When?
2016.
Oh wow, okay. So when
And actually, before that, though, it started like in 2015. Um, for some reason, I don't know if you understand Maryland, but there's an eastern shore and a western shore. It's like with the Chesapeake Bay in between. I went all the way across to DC to take a yoga class, and I ended up liking it so much that I ended up doing yoga teacher training there. So traveling, um, you know, couple hour round trips to get to to yoga teacher training.
wow, that's really
And
cool.
I ended up quitting eating. I don't eat meat either, and I'm a meat cutter at the grocery store.
And this was all happening during that same period you also gave up meat.
Yep, gave up meat 2015, stopped smoking, gave up eating meat, took yoga, became a yoga teacher, and yoga is still a big part of my life.
So this is during this like 2 or 3 year period when Saturn's going through your sixth house of health and
Hmm.
illness. Was there a reason, was there a health issue that came up that caused you to
No,
start wanting to take greater
nope.
care of your
It was
health, or
just
what prompted it?
actually when you were talking to the other person before about the Uranus opposition or whatever, and I was thinking, maybe that was it, something like that, where it was just a really just a wild. Actually, another thing was around that same time, my wife and I took a trip. We went to Iceland. I know it's kind of odd. We've never been anywhere out of the country. And yes, 20 the beginning March of 2016, I think it was. We went to Iceland.
Okay. There was an eclipse in your ninth house of foreign travel at that time.
Hmm. Went to Iceland. Like I said, ended up going to uh, and why we did that, I still don't really know. Loved it though. It's an awesome place.
Okay. Well, that's interesting in terms of like that. And then you're also taking classes. And also, what was the motivation for becoming vegetarian at that time? Was it philosophical?
Yes. If I, why, if I don't eat my dog, why would I eat a cow?
Was that influenced at all by some of the yoga and the Eastern philosophy that you're getting
Yes.
into?
Yep.
Okay.
Ahimsa. Yep. Nonviolence. Yep. Exactly.
So this is similar to the case we saw earlier in the first example where there was like ninth house activations going on and it indicated change in the person's beliefs basically and philosophy and worldview and outlook, but also um, educational things at the same time, like starting to learn and open themselves up to new ways of viewing the world through education, which then really like impacting their beliefs. And then you're also, so it's like that's happening with the eclipses taking place in your ninth house for a couple of years, but then also there's very tangible physical things happening where that same month you actually travel to a foreign country at the same time.
Mhm. Yep.
Cool. All right. And that's impacting sixth house stuff with Saturn going through the sixth. And then what happens after that?
Okay, then you go up to the 2020. Well, actually, before that, just before the 2020, if you go to 2019, early 2019, that's when I found out my father wasn't my father. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know if that was that Saturn going over the sun. I'm not sure. I always kind of, it was like, we laugh about it now because it was kind of funny. Me and my wife, like I said, we've been together for, you know, 38 years. And I've said the whole time that, I don't think my father was my father. We used to laugh about it. I used to say like my father must be like John Lennon or something like that, is just because we were really kind of different. But
Mm.
it ended up he wasn't my father. Found
What?
out on Ancestry.
Okay. So yeah, this is the ancestor. Why did you decide to look up
I
ancestry in
was
the
very
first place?
interested in my own, just finding out your own, heritage type
Okay.
thing. And so I went on there. I still didn't know it until my sister joined Ancestry. And actually, she's the one that pointed out. She goes, "Why is Ray listed as a half?" You know,
Oh, right, because your mother's half and then the other is unknown.
yes,
Um, so this is interesting because it's like Saturn did go over it's doing several things, but it's transiting through in early 19, the first part of Capricorn, and it like your natal signature is you have Uranus in the fourth house, widely conjunct the degree of the IC with Uranus at 8 degrees of Libra and the IC at 15 degrees of Libra. And then the ruler of the fourth house of parents and father is the Venus, which is at 6 degrees of Capricorn, conjunct the sun at 12 degrees of Capricorn. And you had said that your father was a very positive influence in your life, and that's that benefic Venus. But then Saturn starts transiting over that and like squares your Uranus, conjoins your Venus and your Sun, and then this test result comes back and you find out quite unexpectedly that he wasn't your biological father.
right. Yep. I
So
mean,
how
and
did
the funny thing, I mean, I guess too, though, like, when I sit there and think about it, our family, we weren't rich growing up by no means, but my father was very well known. He was like the chief of police in this small town, right, that we live in.
Mhm.
Um, and and it seems, and I was number two of five, so it wasn't like I was the first one or the last one. I was the second one, so there was something happening there. Um, you see what I mean?
so
Yeah.
so it's like maybe so your parents are together, and do you know the status of your other siblings? Like, do they know for sure that they're like, was it the case, is the scenario you're saying that then your mother and father that you grew up with like had one child and then
My brother, yeah, which is their child, yeah, theirs. Well, at least, how about that? You're right. My,
you don't know? I mean,
yeah, there's two. Me and my sister, I guess, are the only ones that had done the ancestry, and my mother.
what,
And she
what,
claims that I'm the only one that's different.
okay. So, oh, right, because your mom's still around, so you're able to ask her
Yes.
about this.
Yeah, I asked her now, but and then maybe this is the Scorpio in me too. I don't really believe anything that she says now. That's a 50-year lie, so.
So, did she admit that there was someone else and that she had either had an
She
affair
has
or
a full story of it. Her story, yes, she has a story where uh, my father and her were having they had just got me married. So
Mhm.
my brother's 2 years older than me. So they had gotten married, had him, and they was kind of like having a rough time. So mom's story is that they had split up. She hooked up with her old boyfriend prior to my father. Okay.
Mhm.
And then that apparently she says is my father. Then they
Okay.
got the father that raised me. They got back together again, and then she had me. So it was in that I was, apparently I was born while they were back together. So
I mean,
whether or
that's
not he
plausible. I
knew,
mean,
yes, but whether or not he knew, if he's ever known that I am not his son. I don't know. She says he
Mm,
knows, but the story doesn't sit right with me. So I feel like that's not the truth.
mm.
Almost like, she pulled a fast one on him. Maybe not. I don't know. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's hard. I can understand why you'd have those questions and stuff. But it's interesting just looking at this with, so I'm looking at the timing, but just switching it back to the chart itself. I think it's interesting that it's like, on the one hand, we have Uranus in the fourth whole sign house, not too far from the IC. And so this is like the previous chart we looked at where she had Uranus in the third house, and there was something like unexpected and shocking that she learned at some point later in her life about having other siblings that she didn't know about when that was activated. And for you, your chart is turned slightly so that Uranus is in the fourth house, and you learned similarly through ancestry, who again I need to get sponsorship
Yeah.
from, that there was something unexpected or shocking that you learned at some point about your fourth house, and that your father was different than what you thought. And in your case, I think it's interesting that the ruler of the fourth house in the IC is that Venus, which is so close to the sun that it's actually
Combust.
under
Yeah.
it's combust, it's under the beams of the sun. And in the ancient texts, like in Rhetorius from like the 6th century, he says that when a planet's under the beams, there's something secret or hidden about that planet. And he said that if the planet that signifies marriage is under the beams, then the marriage happens in secret. But for you, it's like the planet that represents the parents
Father.
and the father is under the beams, and it represents there's something hidden about the father that later, when Saturn is transiting over that, would be revealed in this interesting way. Um, so that's really interesting and really cool. What, actually, even just the fact that you have a Venus Uranus square, something that's interesting and funny about that is sometimes when a person has a Venus Uranus hard aspect, it can indicate having many relationships or having something unique about relationships or not settling down, basically. But it's actually been quite the opposite for you. You've had a long standing relationship for more than 3 decades. But the part about that signature that is true in your life is when you were born. If you think about that, like what was happening with your mom and your father is that they had gone through a period of breaking up. She'd maybe been with somebody else, and then you were born. And so it's like that's the signature, is that it was tied in with your parents' relationship and whatever had happened there in that formative part of your life, but it wasn't necessarily something that you've had actually a pretty long and stable relationship.
Yes. And of course, my wife says I'll never make another commitment. That was the big one, and I'm always like, no more major. Just like the house, like I said, I don't want to really buy into the long-term thing. It's kind of a
Hmm.
funny thing, but yeah.
Okay, that's funny. So, yeah, that's pretty big. How did that hit you at the time with Saturn like transiting over your stuff when you found that out? Was that hard, or how did you
Yes,
take it?
extremely hard. We had a really rough time. And then it was kind of like a shock to, it seemed like that's part of the reason why I didn't really believe my mom's story. It seemed like a shock to her too.
Mm,
And she knew I was on Ancestry, knew my sister was on, and she actually did Ancestry. So it was, it seemed like it was that's why I kind of, it was a hard thing. And then she had to tell my other brothers and sisters, and it was a kind of a
right.
big, weird family thing.
Maybe
Um,
she always had uncertainty surrounding which one it was, just because the time frame was so close of
so
when,
close, yeah.
yeah, so maybe she didn't know until then.
Till then, right? And she kind of like maybe buried it in her mind, it just, it's 50 years. I mean, I was 50 years old.
Right.
Um,
That's wild. Yeah.
yeah. So
And then her chart, I mean, not that we're going to look at it, but do you have a time chart for her?
I don't have a time chart. She was born at home. I know it's a weird deal. My grandfather delivered her at home, so it's kind of hard to get an exact time.
Yeah, it would just be
Um,
fascinating to see what that's like in her chart, where maybe that Uranus is like in the fifth house, or there's something going on there in terms of her experience and fate, basically, in terms of the topic of children, and as well as, probably like activation and transits that she was having when you find this out.
Right.
Um, that's always fascinating to me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and then
Then the biggie, I fell off the cliff. I felt like just in March 13th, 2020, or
so,
yeah, 2020, March 13th. Yeah,
so
Saturn is
a
right
year
on my
later
ascendant.
you have a major accident.
Yeah, my right when that COVID broke out, when the store was going crazy, um, I ended up rupturing a disc in my back. That
You fell off a
same,
cliff.
yeah, I felt like I fell off a cliff. And not really, I didn't really fall off the cliff. I said it felt like it. Yeah,
What
my
happened?
disc, yeah, my disc ruptured, and I ended up getting a drop foot out of it. So like I can't lift my foot. I had
Mm,
surgery, but that was all during COVID. So the emergency surgery that I needed took like 2 months to get. Um,
right, because of the lockdowns.
yeah, it was crazy, and it was hard to do. It's hard to get anything done. And
So go ahead.
so I ended up losing my job, ended up losing my health, um, all in one fell swoop.
Oh, you lost your job as a result of this? Okay, so
Yeah, I ended up on workman's comp why they did the surgery for the next 6 years. So just this past February, um, they finally resolved it, and now I receive disability from workman's comp.
okay,
But it's
got
been
it.
never been contested. It was never, I mean, always understood, but for some reason, they always had me on the uh, just kind of like out in limbo. Um, I guess hoping to see if I would get better, and I
Mm,
never have. And actually, I developed another illness, and that's a funny thing with that next. It's not really funny, but astrologically funny. That I have what's it called, CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, and it's in my feet. And you see that Mars in Pisces. I always say now that that's the Mars in Pisces, that burning feeling in my feet.
mm, okay.
Um,
It feels like actual like burning in your feet.
yes, yeah, and it's
Interesting.
pretty much all the time. I have some kind of, whether it's like electrical or burning or whatever. It's just always pain, um, constant pain from that.
Sure. So, but in terms of this event on March 13th,
Hmm.
2020, we see that Saturn was at 29 degrees of Capricorn, and it was exactly conjoining your Mercury and opposing the degree of your ascendant. And then you have this really bad physical injury that actually affects your mobility, which is interesting, both because of Mercury as well as the ascendant degree. And Mercury is actually the ruler of the third house of like local travel. And then shortly after this, there would have been a Mars Saturn conjunction in your eighth house. And Saturn dips into your eighth house for the first time, and you lose your job at this point.
Yes, lose my job, which I had been working there, like I said, total 20 years, but that in between time, so that had last, what was it, 10 years, 10 or 11 years I had worked there. Yeah, they end up letting me go. Now,
So
the
we're
good thing
back.
is that, one good thing is that um, I've still gotten paid. I've never lost money. So we didn't lose like the other time when I had my back injury, that I lost money when the Saturn was in my second. We didn't lose money
Right.
this time. We kept getting paid.
But then you didn't get the disability until 2026.
Yeah, well, the firm, yeah. So I still got paid through workman's comp, but the disability when they finally come through with you have to go to court and go through all that, and the judge came back with permanent disability, and that wasn't declared until February, this past February.
Was there like a reduction in your income at least, or how would you describe it when Saturn like goes
Well,
into your
I
eighth
guess
house.
it didn't feel like a reduction because you don't pay tax. So it's a reduction in pay, but it's basically just the tax, I think it feels like.
Okay.
So we never really lost. I was lucky. I feel like we got lucky through
Mm.
that.
Okay.
So not like the other time where we lost everything, the house, everything. We didn't lose anything this time, other than my
Got
job and my health. But
yeah. And
actually,
that
too, it put me into astrology. So I think that that's an interesting thing. So right at that same time, um, what June, I started my first astrology class,
June of 2021,
2020.
June of 2020. Okay.
I think, yeah, 2020. So
What prompted that?
I was home. I knew the instructor from the yoga class was
Mm.
Adam Ellenboss. He does the nightlight astrology.
Mm. Yeah.
I took his class.
Nice.
I had
Nice.
taken his, I was in his, their yoga class was Sky House Yoga. That was the class I took in DC.
Oh, that
Um,
makes, yeah, on the East Coast, that makes sense.
that's how I knew him. Yes.
Okay. Um, Sort of trying to look and see what was going on in terms of that, or what would indicate that Saturn's retrograding back over your Mercury. Right, because Saturn retrograded back into Capricorn after dipping into Aquarius, and then Jupiter eventually would come up on that as well. Yeah, I don't know what the primary thing is for that in terms of the indication for when you started studying astrology. I might just not be seeing it here. I see Neptune's like going over your Mars and stuff and your North Node in the ninth house. Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure
yeah.
about that one. I find it actually, so it became like an opportunity.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So for the last 6 years, I've got to study stuff.
Yeah, just because you, due to the lack of mobility, it's like there's not much else
Mhm.
you can do.
Yep, astrology. I've dipped into Egypt. You know, as soon as that Pluto goes over that descendant um, degree, I have dived deep into Egypt, the funerary text.
Mm, okay.
Yes, I have just majorly. I don't know what. Well, you know what prompted was the Egyptian bounds. From there, it took me into Egypt.
And you said that was when Pluto reached 29 Capricorn?
Yes,
Okay, conjoining your Mercury and your descendant, and you got really into the Egyptian
just
funerary and
dug
like
in deep.
afterlife.
Yes,
Okay,
and investigative. Digging into the stuff. It was fascinating, but and I still am.
nice. That's cool. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that Saturn was moving out of your eighth, and like Pluto, when it's hitting your descendant, it's also like moving into your eighth house. And yeah, that's really cool. So that brings us to today, to 2026.
And I'm not
Um,
anxious for my next Saturn return.
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I can't, I can't imagine.
you've been around or you've got the hang of things at this point with Saturn, and
Well,
it's
that's what you
interesting.
say, but I don't know that that's going to be the truth. I hope it's the truth. Yeah, you're supposed to like you gain something from that, all the other years, and you kind of have mastery, right, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, on the one hand, I think it's interesting with your chart with having that stellium in Capricorn, how important Saturn has been in your life and how much its transits have tracked, especially through the houses, like those different phases of your life as we were seeing um, when it was going through your second house and financial issues, bankruptcy, and then the third house, and then getting a car, and the fourth house and buying a home. It's been interesting seeing how important, and then eventually Saturn going over your Venus, the ruler of the fourth, and your sun, and finding out about your father. It's really tracked a lot of times, and they haven't been super easy times. Oftentimes, there's an obstacle or a setback or something challenging that comes up, but then it's also been periods in which you are sometimes, even though you take two steps back, you then take steps forward, and there's forward progress often through effort, like striving and movement and things like that. So it's not
But it's
all
like
that.
true. I mean, it is true. Like too, when like we lost that house, the first, in 2006, that house that we were living in, it needed a roof, it needed heat, it needed a connection to the street for a septic, um,
Mhm.
all these major financial things that I couldn't afford at the time. So a lot of times we say, hell, we got lucky again because even though we lost that house, we bought this house, so many years later.
Mhm.
Um, and it feels like, we're not under those same burdens that we had before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sometimes when there's a difficult, like a malefic transit, there can be a loss. This came up in the last webinar last weekend. There can be a loss in some area, but then it opens you up for an opportunity later on. And even though that sounds like a cliche, sometimes you actually see that happening through the transits and through the astrology.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that. So we were seeing that last week in the context of like the seventh house, where there would be difficult transit and there would be like a relationship loss, but then it opened the person up to find somebody better later on. But for you, you're talking about instances where there was like losing a house, but then opening you up to end up being on the path to eventually find what would be a more long-term living
A better house
situation that
for
was
us.
better.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Nice. Okay. I like that. I think that's really good. Um, yeah, well, and also part of your story has been developing things, working on things internally, like you dealt with, especially when you were younger, some issues in terms of mental health. But then it sounds like there's been some points along the way where you focused more on both your physical health as well as your mental health, and that's something where you're probably in a better place today than you had been at other points earlier on, I would think.
Yes, with like the yoga and actually, so I mean, you could think of it that way. Um, Learning yoga, meditation has helped me with my illness. So it almost seems like the road was being paved. Um, yeah, fate has a place to get to, but they give me this tool, and then the astrology. So my spiritual practice has just blossomed, bloomed, whatever you want to say, especially since the time of my back. Um, allowing me to go deeper, I guess, and then
Mhm.
having the astrology to back it up, seeing your place in the cosmos. I mean, even through the hard times, if you know that it almost like someone's watching, you know what I mean? A higher power or whatever you want to say. I'm not saying astrology is religion or anything like that. I'm saying that your time here is being marked,
Mhm. Right.
and
Yeah,
and you can really see it just in this in the I mean, this is not, you cannot, to me, you cannot doubt that there's something here. Um, you can see a relationship between, you know, we went dark, but the stars and yourself. So,
here, I'll reshare it. Give me a sec. If that helps for the lighting.
I mean,
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the important things that we've seen here is sometimes when you're going through good times or you're going through challenging times, that sometimes being able to externalize some of that to get some perspective on your life and how the timing lines up does provide some perspective and there's something reassuring about that. I feel
yes,
like to see that it's part of a broader
a
sequence of your
grand
life.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah, and to help identify like what your life narrative is. And even though some parts of our life narrative can be challenging and that's not always good things, even just having some perspective on that can sometimes be inherently beneficial or inherently helpful.
Yes, definitely.
I love it. All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me for this, and thanks for sharing your
Hey,
story. I really
hey,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. Hey, and then thank you for this astrology podcast. It's kind of like anchored me too. I'll be honest. So I love it.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I appreciate that. All right.
Thank you.
Well, take care.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Awesome. All right. I think that's it for today. That was amazing. We only got through three. I'd like to keep going, but I think I've hit a wall in terms of, as much as I can talk today because I want to be present and like alert for every consultation. Um, but this is amazing, and I hope it's clear now what I was talking about at the beginning of this workshop. And part of the purpose of this is I wanted to talk about this in the context of your fate is the sequence and the narrative of your life. And part of what we're doing is with astrology is we're trying to understand our life narrative and our life story. And our life narrative and our life story is working out the sequence of events that brought us to where we are today and why certain things happened at different points in our life and how that set us up and brought us to where we are today, as well as where we're headed into the future. And one of the things that's great about astrology is it can help tell us about, on the one hand, the birth chart and some of the inherent signatures that we have and the things about our fate and about our future that are coming up that are kind of laying there sometimes dormant or latent in the birth chart. But then also through different timing techniques, we can see important turning points in the life where the things that were promised by the birth chart will be delivered at certain points. And I think this has to do with again, just this notion of fate being the unfolding of a sequence of events in accordance with some sort of plan or some sort of purpose. And I think there's different ways to contextualize that because that can be, one can either view that in a spiritual or like religious context as a sort of like providential ordering of events. And in some ways, that in the ancient world, I think that's how the ancient Stoic astrologers viewed it because they viewed everything ordered according to a plan or a purpose. And I think there's like that version of it. There's probably other ways we conceptualize it, like in modern times, there's probably a version of that according to what is the name of that like modern version of like things being coded of like a not a virtual world, but there's like a specific phrase of that like that that's trending lately about yeah, simulation theory. So there's like modern ideas about simulation theory and whether we're living in a sort of like simulation of some sort. And there's something interesting where about that from that perspective, where what we could be seeing through astrology is the code that's kind of like underlying reality in some sense and is indicating things in the future because there's some things that are kind of like coded into our lives. And there's like a modern version where we could probably conceptualize things in that way in some interesting way. Um, and different people can kind of like approach that from different philosophical or religious or metaphysical frameworks, depending on what your background is. But for me, this is part of what I've been trying to revive and understand is the ancient notions of fate and why ancient astrologers conceptualized astrology as the study of fate. And I think it has to do with the things that we were seeing here today and the way that astrology is able to access and describe something that's otherwise not accessible to us, which is this underlying ordering of events according to a sequence and according to a purpose or a narrative that can help to clue us in into what the story or what the narrative is underlying our lives and the role or the part that we play in the world. And we all play different parts in the world or different roles. But part of what we're doing with astrology is trying to figure out what our role is and what our purpose is in the world and where things are headed. So, um, yeah, so this is my approach, and I love taking the approach that I've developed through this blend of ancient Hellenistic astrology and modern astrology, and kind of blending those together. That's basically, if you want to learn more about that and more about my approach, that's what I teach in my book, Hellenistic Astrology: The Study of Fate and Fortune, as well as in my Hellenistic astrology course, where I do webinars just like this one every month, and I teach people how to read birth charts with this approach so that you can kind of apply it systematically to each different individual that you meet to try to understand what their life narrative is. So I hope this has been interesting and useful, both from a technical standpoint to show some of my approach of doing chart readings, but also philosophically to give some insight into the underlying philosophy that I kind of approach things with in viewing astrology more through this lens of fate and understanding the sequence and the narrative of our lives. And I think there's more that we could explore there and go into, but I think that leaves things. I hope that gives some insight into that approach, and I hope it clarifies things. And I hope that people can take that approach and continue to develop it further because I think there's a lot more that we learned even just today. Like I said, every time we look at a new chart, I learned something new because there's always a unique manifestation of how certain chart placements play out depending on the context of the life. And today we learned some things about how, a consultation is a dialogue between two people, or at least that's the best way that a consultation has always been done as a dialogue between two people, because then you're both taking the things that you know, and through that exchange, you uncover things about the person's fate and life story and narrative through the dialogue of the client or the person who's having the reading, knowing about their own life, and the astrologer who just has the chart and is approaching it based on what they know about the astrology, but they're learning a lot about the person's life in the process. And it's this reciprocal back and forth that creates something that's unique and special as part of the consultation. So I gave kind of a snippet of that here because obviously I was doing shortened, condensed consultations that were also on the fly with no preparation. And I'm sure there were different things that I overlooked in terms of transits that were relevant, or we didn't get into other timing techniques like zodiac releasing, for example, or secondary progressions or perfections or other things like that that can help to specify some of the outcomes or to show different levels of the interworkings of fate and the different activations of the chart at different points in the person's life. But even at this basic level of just looking at the birth chart and looking at transits and eclipses and outer planet transits and things like that, you can already see a lot, and it can help to clarify a lot about a person's life. So I love doing that. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, let me know. Maybe I'll do another one of these again soon with patrons. Thanks to each of you who shared your story today. I appreciate you, all three of you, a lot. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to more examples today, but I really wanted to like sit with each of these and sort of like let them breathe, because the more you do, the more you start to understand and see, and the more it sort of like opens up. And I really love that process of like hearing about a person's life and seeing how well the chart matches and seeing it really come alive in that way. So yeah, this was great. So thanks everyone for joining me. If you have any questions, if you're watching this on YouTube later, post them in the YouTube comments. If you want to join this, then become a patron of the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon, and you'll get access to these live workshops. And thanks to each of the patrons that support this work and allow me to do this. I really appreciate you all. All right, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for watching or listening to this episode of the Astrology Podcast, and I'll see you again next time. If you're a fan of the podcast and you want to get access to bonus content, then become a patron through my page on Patreon, where you can get early access to new episodes, attend live recordings and webinars, access the monthly electional astrology podcast, the secret astrology podcast that's only available to patrons, or you can even get your name listed in the credits. Find out more at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Special thanks to the patrons on our producers tier, including patrons Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Isa Sabah, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa Delano, Sunny Bozbaz, Kwatsi Alabarahu, Annie Newman, Ginger Sodlier, Berlin West, and Nikki Crawford. If you're looking for good dates to do things this year, then be sure to check out our 2026 Electional Astrology Report, which is a guide to the most fortunate dates in 2026. You can get it at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. If you're really looking to take your studies of astrology to the next level, then consider signing up for my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, plus live webinars and Q&A sessions each month, and at the end of the course, you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me. Find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, then check out the new consultations page on the podcast website, where I have a list of astrologers I recommend for birth chart readings and other types of consultations. You can find that at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, and you can get a 15% discount on it by using the promo code AP15 at the website alabe.com. For Mac users, we recommend the program called AstroGold for Mac OS, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount at their website, which is astrogold.io. And shout out to our sponsors for this episode, including the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in Seattle and being live streamed online May 21st through the 25th, 2026. Find out more information at norwac.net, as well as the United Astrology Conference, which is happening in Chicago this year, September 3rd through the 9th, 2026. Find out more information about that at uacastrology.com.